Good morning. Welcome to a new strand of Thursday Thought. Food, glorious food. Now, in the time that I've been involved with Westmoreland, I've acquired a bit of a reputation for being a bit too keen on food. And hands up, it's true. The deadly sin of gluttony is, I have to confess, the one to which I have put up the feeblest of fights. I'm almost incapable of resisting good food, and it's not entirely my fault, because I did spend the greater part of my formative years growing up in Brussels, and if there's one thing that Brussels is famous for, it's its food. And I've never quite adjusted to an English diet, not completely anyway. And I suppose part of the reason why I'm naturally inclined to this business is that it's part of a crusade dear to my heart, to raise the standard of English cuisine. For years, after moving to England in the late 1980s, the phrase, "let's go out to eat," made me thoroughly miserable. It promised so much and delivered so little. I felt like Pavlov's dog. The bell rung, the gastric juices flowing, and nothing to eat. At least nothing worthwhile anyway. So perhaps you might understand now that when you see the pitiful spectacle of a local vicar absorbed with total concentration as he devours an almond croissant, momentarily absent to the whole of the rest of the world, what you're seeing is a poor soul conditioned by years of starvation of good food. I'm not quite sure why I'm confessing all this in public, but I think our love of food goes deeper than mere hedonistic craving. They say you are what you eat, and I think that's true at a very deep level. Yes, obviously we're made up of the chemical elements that we consume, and I suppose on that basis probably about a quarter of my body is red Bordeaux. But in so many ways, food makes us who we are. In the Christian tradition, of course, we get our identity from a meal, Holy Communion. Yes, it's a stylised meal, but it is a meal nonetheless, in which the bread and wine that we consume makes us who we are, giving us our identity as Christians. And that tradition itself springs from an even older Jewish tradition, the tradition of Passover, and that's a tradition I find deeply inspiring. Every year, round about now, every Jewish family will sit down for a Passover meal. The meal begins with the youngest child asking, "Why is this night different from all other nights?" And then the father recounts the tale of how they were once slaves in Egypt, but were set free and placed in the promised land. And they use the food to tell the story, as though they personally were present that night when the angel of death passed over their houses, when the chariots bore down on them and the Red Sea parted to let them through, when they endured those 40 years in the desert and finally arrived here in the promised land. So they eat something bitter to remind them of the bitterness of slavery, and they taste salted water to remind them of the tears they shed, and so on. And by the time they finish the meal, they are that Jewish people. They are a family, they are a race, and they are in the promised land, wherever they might actually be in the world. They understand who they are, they understand where they've come from, and they understand why they're here now. Now that's a particularly powerful use of food to define who you are, but we do this too, not in quite such a dramatic way, in very many subtle ways, and sometimes ways that are so subtle we don't even recognise them. As a Scottish exile, the ritual of haggis on Burns Night has become very important to remind me of my cultural background. For my English wife, it's bangers and mash and bonfire toppie on Guy Fawkes Night. On Belgian National Day, they used to pass around unfeasible quantities of moule frite with mayonnaise. Food accompanies almost every national celebration in the world. And more personally, who we eat with in many ways defines who we are. The people we eat with most regularly is our family, and in many ways, eating together is what defines the family circle. By contrast, eating in public can be an awkward, embarrassing thing. It can make you feel exposed, almost as embarrassing as those dreams you have when you suddenly find yourself in public with no trousers on, unless that's just me. Being invited to eat at someone's house is an invitation to be admitted into the inner circle of a person's life. It's a sign of trust, an invitation to deep friendship. And is there a single romance anywhere in the world that hasn't begun with a meal? In so many ways and on so many levels, you are what you eat. Now I know I'm biased, but I think Jesus was onto something when he used a meal as the vehicle to change the world, and more personally, as the means by which to change me. and any God who speaks to me through food is definitely the God for me. But we too can use food to change the world. This business, in its small way, is trying to do just that. Almost every one of the values it expresses has something to do with food at its heart. Whether it's selling food you believe in, caring for the earth that produces it, building a family-like business around it, you've realised that food can be a powerful force for good in this world. And in your private lives, this can also be true. Food can say so much. I'm sorry. I love you. I trust you. Happy birthday. I'm so glad you're mine. Let's plan something great together. Thank you. Somehow when these words are just said, we find it hard to believe. But when we express them in food, we get it. We really take it to heart. So let's feed the world, because good food shared is a little package of love, of friendship, of reconciliation, and celebration of everything we are. Because really, in every way, you are what you eat. So bon appetit.